Tonight we slip softly into the candlelit world of Japan's Heian court, the silken sleeves, the rustling blinds, the poetry drifting like incense smoke. You're settling down in bed, and I'm about to tell you the story of one of the most extraordinary women in literary history, Murasaki Shikibu. You probably won't survive this tale in real life. You'd be stuck in a labyrinth of etiquette, kimono layers heavy enough to make you sweat through 3 lifetimes, and more political gossip than your local Facebook group. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Kyoto around the year 973, the city humming with the power of the Fujiwara clan. Imagine the capital as a checkerboard of palaces, temples, and narrow lanes, every corner carrying whispers of influence. You're born into the northern branch of the Fujiwara family, not the top tier swimming in power, but still close enough to smell the lacquered doors of authority. Your father, Fujiwara no Tametoki, is a scholar, a man with ink always staining his sleeves, more at home with Chinese classics than with the political wrestling matches of court. From the start, your world is saturated with words. The Heian court is obsessed with poetry, waka verses tossed around like memes on Twitter, only with better calligraphy. At banquets, noblemen impress noble women not by flexing biceps but by flexing metaphors. Your relatives know that to be clever with a brush is to be socially irresistible. But you, little one, have an unusual path. Unlike many girls in your world, you get early access to Chinese learning, something mostly reserved for men. Your father, perhaps seeing that his sons are less gifted with characters, sighs and says, almost famously, "If only you had been born a boy." Ouch! That one stings, even through the centuries. Yet that sting lights a quiet fire in you. You won't just read for ornament, you'll devour the classics, absorbing tales of dynasties and philosophy, even when it feels like you're sneaking contraband. Life at the Heian court is equal parts splendor and suffocation. You grow up watching the rituals of rank, where a misplaced word could cause offense, and where ladies live much of life hidden behind painted screens. Perfume clings to everything, clothing layers reach the weight of a weighted blanket squared, and gossip drips like honey, sticky and impossible to wash off. You learn early how to listen more than you speak, an art that will later feed every page of your writing. A mainstream fact about your world. The Fujiwara clan, your extended family, basically controls the throne by marrying daughters into the imperial line. Think of them as the ultimate in-laws from hell, elegant, powerful, and always planning the next marital chess move. But a quirky tidbit: aristocrats use crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, people smear themselves with it to keep pale skin, because the paleness equals beauty. Suddenly that sticky gossip doesn't sound so bad, right? Still, historians argue whether your father truly encouraged your reading, or whether you seized the texts in secret, like a midnight snack. Did Tametoki deliberately foster a daughter's mind, or was he just lamenting wasted potential? No one agrees, and you, quiet behind your sleeves, leave no direct confession. The Kyoto of your youth smells of incense and damp wooden floors, a city forever shifting between elegance and unease. Fires and epidemics sweep through sometimes, reminding you that even silken curtains can't shield anyone from impermanence. But for now, you live in a household of scholarship, absorbing the rhythms of brushstrokes and poetry contests. When men show off, you smirk quietly, because you already know their references better than they do. As you drift toward sleep listening, imagine yourself a child in a long, trailing robe, watching the lanterns flicker against the polished screens, your ears tuned to verses about cherry blossoms while your mind hums with lines no one else can see. You don't know it yet, but those private words will someday become the world's first great novel. And tonight, you're just beginning your story. You spend your girlhood largely hidden, tucked away behind the gauzy blinds and painted screens of the Heian household. Women of your rank rarely move openly. Instead, you exist in half-light, overhearing conversations but rarely stepping forward. The rhythm of your days is set by ritual, from the careful layering of robes to the faint aroma of incense curling through corridors. Every movement is restrained, deliberate, as though life itself is choreographed. From a young age, you are steeped in calligraphy, learning to shape characters with elegance that borders on performance art. Your brush becomes your voice, the width of a stroke whispering emotions you're not allowed to speak aloud. Poetry follows soon after. In Heian society, knowing how to compose waka verses is like knowing how to text with emojis today. You can flirt, argue, or mourn all through 31 syllables. Moreover, your family ensures you practice music, courtly conversation, and the delicate etiquette that keeps status afloat. Your real education, though, comes from observation. Behind those painted screens, you learn to decode tone, to notice who bows an inch lower and who lets their sleeve drag just long enough to signal disdain. You giggle quietly at rival families trying to outdo each other in robe colors, like a high-stakes fashion show. A mainstream fact about your time: color codes mattered. Purple, for example, was reserved for high rank, while clashing shades could mark you as tasteless. Yet a quirky tidbit slips in too. People sometimes perfumed their robes by hanging them in smoke-filled closets, which means you might end up smelling like sandalwood, cinnamon, or occasionally burnt cedar, depending on who managed the fire. Your father encourages your learning in fits and starts. You sense his pride but also the frustration that you're not the son he wanted to carry the intellectual legacy. Historians still argue whether this tension made you sharper or more withdrawn. Some believe it spurred you to push against gender norms, others say it deepened your melancholy streak. Either way, it shapes the way you view the world, keenly aware of limits, yet quietly determined to slip past them. While other children might chase each other in gardens, your amusements are inward. You read tales, recite poems, and doodle with brushes, sometimes inventing imaginary dialogues when no one listens. You gaze out at blooming cherry blossoms and think not just about beauty but about how quickly petals scatter. Even as a girl, impermanence sits at the edge of your thoughts, like an older sibling you didn't ask for but can't ignore. But don't picture this life as all solemn and scented with incense. You and your companions, also hidden away, whisper jokes behind screens. You tease each other about who would marry which courtier, laughing so hard your sleeves slip down, scandalously revealing a wrist. For all the strict rules, you find small rebellions, sneaking an extra ink stick, staying up late to watch fireflies. Your wit grows sharp, sometimes too sharp. Later, your diary will show flashes of sly sarcasm, a voice you polish in these cloistered years. By your teenage years, you begin to sense the larger machinery of court life. Matchmakers whisper about alliances. Relatives angle for posts and marriages like pieces on a go board. You overhear stories of emperors enthralled by women who can compose the perfect poem at dawn. Somewhere inside, you wonder if you will be one of those chosen, or if your role is simply to watch, record, and endure. Finally, as your childhood shades into adulthood, the ink on your fingers becomes your constant companion, and the painted screens around you feel less like barriers and more like curtains on a stage where you are preparing your part. You come of age in a society where marriage is less about love and more about alliances, status, and timing. For you, marriage arrives like a well-placed brushstroke, expected, inevitable, and not entirely your choice. Your groom, Fujiwara no Nobutoka, is older, an official with a respectable rank. The arrangement makes sense. Your family gains stability, he gains a cultured wife, but you, caught between duty and curiosity, step into the union with cautious hope. At first, life as a married woman surprises you. Nobutoka respects your learning more than most men of his station would. He enjoys your poetry, perhaps even your sly wit. You share verses in the old Heian style, sending them back and forth like love notes on silk. There are evenings when you sit together with lamps glowing, the faint scent of incense mingling with the rustle of robes, and you almost feel a sense of companionship. Almost. But Heian marriages often lack permanence. Husbands sometimes float between residences, maintaining ties with multiple women, each relationship shaped as much by politics as by affection. You, too, find yourself alone more often than not, sitting in quiet chambers, waiting for footsteps that may or may not return. A mainstream fact here: aristocratic husbands usually visited their wives at night, returning to their own family homes by morning. Romantic? Perhaps not, it was more like an aristocratic sleepover schedule. Still, there are moments when your heart warms. You give birth to a daughter, Kensha, and your life briefly feels fuller, stitched with new meaning. You cradle her tiny hands, marvel at the way her eyes follow the flicker of light across the screen. Yet, as quickly as joy arrives, grief follows. Nobutoka dies not long after your daughter's birth. Some accounts say it was a plague sweeping Kyoto, others suggest illness. Historians still argue whether you were deeply attached to him or simply resigned, but either way, widowhood descends early, leaving you with a baby in your arms and an empty mat beside you. Loss in the Heian world is both personal and public. You are expected to grieve gracefully, to wear somber robes and withdraw into quieter company. Yet grief is never that neat. You feel the sharp edges late at night, staring at the lamp flame as it trembles. You scribble verses on scraps of paper, words flowing faster than tears. One of your waka might have whispered of longing and the cold emptiness of dawn without a companion. And here's your quirky tidbit: morning rituals in Heian times sometimes included cutting back on perfumes or deliberately wearing drabber colors. Imagine a society where even your smell must participate in grief. Your robes, usually layers of color combinations carefully chosen, now lean toward subdued, making your presence even more shadowy in courtly gatherings. The loss pushes you deeper into yourself. You grow sharper, more contemplative, less willing to spend energy on shallow displays. Perhaps this grief becomes the soil where your creativity will root itself. Perhaps, in watching impermanence so closely, you begin to understand how stories can outlast flesh and bone. Yet, even as you mourn, you're not forgotten. As a young widow with talent, you remain a figure of interest. Whispered comments circle. Will she remarry? Will she dedicate herself to religion? Or will she retreat altogether? You, however, choose another path: ink and imagination. And though the days ahead will carry both responsibility and solitude, you now know the sting of fleeting happiness. That sting, etched deep, will echo through every character you later create. So, as you curl up under the glow of lamplight, with your daughter asleep nearby, you murmur verses into the silence. The marriage that was fleeting has shaped you nonetheless, teaching you the taste of love, loss, and impermanence before your life has even truly begun. Motherhood arrives to you not as a gentle, leisurely season but as a storm that mixes tenderness with sorrow. Your daughter Kensha becomes your anchor, her small cries echoing through the hushed rooms of your household. In her, you find both solace and a reminder of everything you've lost. When she laughs, tiny, bubbling, unstoppable, you feel a flash of light in the quiet, a melody cutting through widowhood silence. But when she sleeps, curled against embroidered pillows, you sit beside her and feel the ache of absence. You're raising her alone, surrounded by watchful relatives and the endless etiquette of the Heian court. Child rearing in your world is complicated. Wet nurses, ladies-in-waiting, and extended kin all share responsibility, but you keep a close eye on her upbringing. You want her to have the refinement of poetry, the grace of calligraphy, the whisper of elegance in every movement. You teach her early how words can carry power, how a brushstroke can hold more meaning than a raised voice. A mainstream fact: in Heian Japan, Children of the aristocracy were often raised in their maternal grandparents' homes, weaving extended family into every cradle song. Yet you, perhaps because of your widowhood, remain more directly tied to Kenshi's growth, shaping her with your own rhythms. Grief doesn't vanish, though. It lingers in the corners like smoke from a fading incense stick. Some days you feel so hollow you can barely lift the brush, and yet you do, scrawling verses about longing, loneliness, and the impermanence of joy. You know that in your society, a woman is expected to mourn with poise, not wail, not break the delicate harmony of courtly life. You wear subdued robes, your colors whispering sorrow to anyone who glances your way. And here's a quirky tidbit. Aristocratic children's clothing sometimes included tiny amulets sewn into the fabric, meant to ward off spirits or bad luck. You almost certainly placed such protections near Kensha, a mother's hope disguised in silk thread. Maybe you smiled at the thought that invisible guardians watched her, even when you couldn't. Your solitude sharpens your mind. When others gather for banquets, you remain at home, rocking your daughter while thinking through passages of Chinese classics. It's in these quiet vigils that your sense of observation deepens. You notice how grief shapes people differently, how some become brittle, others tender. You tuck those observations away, not knowing yet that they will reappear years later in the loves and losses of fictional characters. Historians still argue whether you sank into true despair in these years, or whether you cultivated a quiet resilience, turning loss into insight. Some read your diary as tinged with melancholy, suggesting you never truly recovered. Others see in your writings flashes of sharp wit, signs that you endured by sharpening your tongue and pen. Either way, you emerge not broken, but reshaped, tempered like a sword drawn from fire. Raising Kensha alone forces you into a rhythm that balances duty and imagination. You spend mornings instructing, afternoons managing household tasks, and evenings with a brush in hand, your daughter asleep nearby. Sometimes, you whisper verses aloud, hoping the sound of poetry will drift into her dreams. The candlelight flickers across her small face, and you feel, briefly, that grief and joy can coexist, not cancel each other. You also begin to recognize the limits of your society. As a widow, you are both pitied and respected, but your independence carries risk. Relatives may seek to place you again in another marriage alliance, but you resist, clinging to the sanctuary of words. And though you live within painted walls and silken blinds, your imagination stretches far beyond, wandering into realms of longing, adventure, and exile. So as the months pass, Kensha grows stronger, and you, though still shadowed by sorrow, grow sharper in your craft. Motherhood doesn't erase your grief, but it gives it form, a reason to keep writing, to keep observing, to keep enduring. Every lullaby you hum is both a song of comfort and a reminder that life, however fragile, still insists on blooming. You retreat further into the world of ink and brush, finding in words the steady rhythm that grief and obligation have denied you. By day, you care for Kensha, managing her small needs and the expectations of your household. By night, you slip into another existence, where the lamp's flame flickers and the scratch of the brush across paper becomes a kind of heartbeat. Solitude, once painful, turns into a secret laboratory of thought. Your father's library, modest but precious, becomes your sanctuary. You pore over Chinese classics, texts that women of your class are technically not supposed to study deeply. These works, Confucian histories, poetry anthologies, moral tales, are considered the domain of men, the training ground for officials. But you, curious and restless, cannot resist. The moment your brush touches the paper, you copy characters, practicing their forms, memorizing their rhythms. Mainstream fact: during the Heian period, literacy in Chinese was largely reserved for men, while women typically wrote in kana, the phonetic script. By mastering both, you sharpen your mind on two whetstones at once. This act of secret study feels deliciously rebellious, like sneaking into a forbidden garden at night. A quirky tidbit here: some noble households perfumed not only robes but also ink sticks, so that the act of writing itself released fragrance. Imagine you, hunched over scrolls, breathing in not just the sharp tang of soot and glue, but faint notes of plum or clove. You're not only absorbing the wisdom of ancient dynasties, you're also inhaling luxury at every line. As you read, you encounter stories of rise and fall, emperors betrayed by fate, poets exiled to distant coasts. These tales resonate with your own sense of impermanence, the melancholy that clings since Nobutoka's death. Yet instead of deepening despair, they ignite something, a realization that human drama, whether in China or Japan, always returns to love, loss, ambition, and regret. Perhaps your society believes women should not dwell on such things, but you do. Historians still argue whether your mastery of Chinese was entirely self-driven or quietly encouraged by your father. Some say Tamitoki, disappointed in his sons, funneled his ambitions into you, giving you the keys to texts he knew you would devour. Others insist your study was clandestine, done in lamplight while the household slept. Either way, your reputation will later astonish rivals, a woman who can hold her own in both scripts, crossing linguistic boundaries with ease. The brush becomes not just a tool but an escape. When your daughter sleeps, you slip into the flow of characters, losing track of hours. You compare the cadence of Chinese verse to the soft flow of waka, noting how each language shapes thought differently. One offers brevity and suggestion, the other grandeur and illusion. Between them, you begin to weave a private style, your own. You also start recording fragments of daily life. At first, perhaps they're casual notes, observations of gossip, small courtly events, your own musings on fashion or etiquette. These fragments will someday harden into your diary, a text that shows both biting wit and aching vulnerability. But in these early years, they are just seeds, little sketches written to keep your mind sharp. Meanwhile, the outside world continues its swirl. Kyoto hums with banquets, poetry contests, and the endless politics of the Fujiwara clan. You, half withdrawn, half involved, watch from the edges. Behind your painted screens, you notice the smallest details, how a rival's robe color signals ambition, how a whispered verse can crush a reputation. These details, later, will furnish the fictional halls of your creation. Your solitude is not empty, it's brimming. You might even laugh sometimes at your own audacity, a woman crossing boundaries no one expects her to. And yet, you keep it private, like a lamp hidden in a corner. Outwardly, you are the dutiful widow, raising a daughter, composing verses when asked. Inwardly, you are sharpening your tools, laying the groundwork for something the world has never seen, a story so vast it will eclipse centuries. So, night after night, you return to the brush. The ink stains your fingers, the fragrance clings to your sleeves, and your mind fills with both borrowed wisdom and original thought. You don't yet know it, but every line you copy, every verse you whisper under your breath, is preparing you for the masterpiece that waits in the shadows of your imagination. Your brush, once a tool of study and secret rebellion, now becomes the doorway to something more personal, your diary. At first, you may not even call it that, it's just notes, fragments of court life, reflections scribbled when the silence grows heavy. But soon these scraps gather shape, and you begin recording daily existence with the precision of a painter and the bite of a satirist. Heian diaries, or Nikki, are not like the locked journals people keep under pillows today. They're part record, part poetry anthology, part social commentary. Yours becomes all three at once. You describe banquets, ceremonies, and festivals, but you also slip in sly asides, your voice sharp enough to cut silk. The Heian court thrives on appearances, but behind your blinds, you notice every stumble, every mismatch of robe color, every lover's sigh that leaks through the paper walls. Mainstream fact: Aristocrats of your time measured refinement by how beautifully one could compose a waka verse on the spot. At events, someone might toss a line about cherry blossoms, and the expected reply must be immediate, perfectly balanced, steeped in references to older poetry. In your diary, you record these exchanges like a backstage critic, savoring both brilliance and failure. But your diary isn't just courtly gossip. You lace it with melancholy reflections about impermanence, about loneliness, about the strangeness of being both inside and outside the glittering world of Heian-Kyoto. Sometimes you sound almost bored, remarking how endless ceremonies blur together. Other times, you sound wistful, longing for something more than the endless cycle of robes, perfumes, and poems. Here's a quirky tidbit. People often judged the scent trails left by robes as much as the verses spoken. Imagine whole rooms whispering, "Her poem was average, but my goodness, that clove and aloe blend was divine." You, pen in hand, record both the brilliance of words and the trivial absurdity of perfume wars. Historians still argue about how much of your diary is honest and how much is performance. Was it a private notebook meant only for yourself, or did you expect others to read it someday? Some scholars think your biting remarks were carefully shaped, a literary persona as much as a personal outpouring. Others argue they're too raw to be anything but genuine. Whatever the truth, your diary remains one of the most vivid windows into Heian court life. Your entries weave seamlessly between poetry and prose. One moment you're describing the empress's robes, the next you're jotting down a waka about longing. The rhythm itself mirrors your state of mind, restless, fluid, moving between observation and introspection. And beneath it all lies a subtle current. You're sharpening your skills, learning how to capture not just events but moods, atmospheres, and inner voices. Kensha grows during these years, and you, though still a widow, find some stability in routine. The diary becomes a companion, someone you can confide in when human company feels lacking. It doesn't judge, it doesn't gossip back, it simply absorbs your words, holding them safe. And as your entries grow more layered, so does your confidence in storytelling. You begin to realize you can capture not only what people do, but who they are inside, their shifting emotions, their contradictions. You probably don't think of yourself as inventing literature when you write. You're just surviving, processing the world through brushstrokes. Yet, with each entry, you're inching closer to something revolutionary. Behind your blinds, with lamp smoke curling and your daughter asleep nearby, you sketch not only court life but the human heart itself. So your diary grows, page by page, until it is no longer simply a pastime. It is a mirror, a confessional, and a rehearsal stage. Someday it will outlast the fleeting perfume of the court, carrying your voice far beyond the silken rooms where it was born. But for now, it is just you, ink, and the quiet thrill of telling the truth when no one else dares. The day arrives when your words, once confined to private scrolls and secret lamplight, carry you into the orbit of true power. You are summoned to serve none other than Empress Shi, daughter of Fujiwara no Michinaga, the most influential man in Japan. Your diary entries and your sharp mind have not gone unnoticed. Whispers of your wit and learning drift through the corridors of Kyoto, until they reach ears that matter. Becoming part of Shi's household is no small thing. The Heian court is a stage of delicate rivalries, with consorts, empresses, and their ladies-in-waiting locked in subtle competitions for prestige. By entering her circle, you step directly into the swirl of influence. She herself is young, refined, and ambitious, but she needs companions who can bolster her reputation with brilliance. That's where you come in. Your duties are varied. You guide the Empress in letters and composition, ensuring her correspondence dazzles with elegance. You entertain her with your own stories and poems, filling long evenings with conversation that sparkles as much as the jeweled lamps. You may even whisper verses in her ear when she needs the perfect reply, the way a speechwriter today might script a politician's zingers. Mainstream fact: at the Heian court, an empress's prestige was reinforced not just by her lineage but by the brilliance of her entourage. A lady-in-waiting with sharp literary gifts could elevate her entire household. Yet this new position is not without tension. You're older than some of the other ladies, with the weight of widowhood and motherhood behind you. They flutter about, gossiping and posturing, while you watch with quiet sharpness. Your wit is admired, but it also intimidates. Some mutter that you're aloof, others that you're too learned for a woman. Historians still argue whether you joined Shi's court willingly, eager for a stage, or whether you were pressured by political maneuvering. Either way, you find yourself seated at the heart of power, your brush now a weapon in battles of prestige. Here's a quirky tidbit. Part of your role may have included selecting perfumes and robe combinations for the empress. Imagine you, a literary genius, fussing over layers of silk like a fashion consultant. You probably rolled your eyes internally, yet you understood that in this world, aesthetics are politics. A single sleeve trailing too long could speak volumes about one's refinement. In quieter moments, you and she form a bond. She respects your intellect, listens when you read aloud, and perhaps confides her own anxieties about life in the palace. You see her not just as an empress but as a young woman navigating enormous expectations. Guiding her gives you purpose, even as you remain, at times, an outsider among the younger, giggling courtiers. And so your world expands. The diary that once captured private musings now informs the way you serve an empress. Your observations sharpen, your words ripple outward. You're no longer only writing for yourself, you're shaping the cultural aura of the most powerful woman in Japan. That's a lot of pressure, but you wear it with a smirk tucked behind your sleeve. Even in the crowded, perfumed chambers of court, you remain yourself, sharp-eyed, melancholy, and endlessly fascinated by the small dramas of human hearts. You may not say it aloud, but deep down you know this position will give you not only status but also endless material. Every whispered rivalry, every stolen glance, every sigh drifting across a painted screen, you're gathering it all. Seeds for something larger, something enduring. So as the lanterns burn low in Shi's chambers, and the empress listens rapt while you spin stories to fill the night, you begin to realize, your voice, once hidden, now has a stage. And the world of fiction is only a breath away. Twilight in the palace becomes your favorite time, when the day's official ceremonies fade and the air grows softer, filled with the rustle of silk and the faint echo of flutes. It's in these hours, when the empress and her attendants seek entertainment, that you begin to weave something new. Not just a verse here or a diary entry there, but whole stories, long, drifting tales of love, exile, and longing. You don't yet know it, but you are creating the foundation of what the world will later call the Tale of Genji. It starts innocently enough. You entertain she and the other ladies with anecdotes, half-fictionalized accounts of court life. Perhaps you describe a handsome prince who suffers from the whims of fate, or a woman so refined that her scent lingers for days. The courtiers, hungry for gossip disguised as art, lean in closer. They recognize shades of real people in your tales, but cloaked in enough elegance to deny the resemblance if needed. The Heian world loves stories, but nothing on this scale has ever existed. Up to now, most prose narratives have been short, episodic, or devotional. You, however, begin to weave layers. One scene flows into another, like streams feeding a river. A prince's romance becomes entangled with politics, his charm tempered by exile, his joys shadowed by inevitable loss. It feels alive, as if the painted screens around you are suddenly transparent and you can see into every hidden chamber. A mainstream fact, the Tale of Genji is often considered the world's first novel, blending prose, poetry, and psychological depth in a way unmatched for centuries. But here's a quirky tidbit. You probably didn't sit down with the intent of writing a novel. Instead, you spun stories like a Netflix series, each new chapter a cliffhanger, written to entertain your audience one evening, then another, then another. The court was binge listening before binge watching was a thing. Historians still argue whether you truly based Genji, the Shining Prince, on real figures. Was he inspired by an imperial consort's lover? By court gossip about an emperor's son? Or was he entirely your invention, a composite of elegance, charm, and melancholy? The truth, cloaked behind your sleeves, remains elusive. The twilight stories grow, chapter by chapter, until they begin to circulate beyond Shi's chambers. Attendants copy them onto scrolls, passing them hand to hand. Courtiers whisper about the latest installment, laughing over the thin disguises of familiar personalities. You smile wryly, your fiction is both entertainment and mirror, both art and subtle critique. And through it all, your own life bleeds into the ink. Your experience of widowhood gives weight to Genji's losses. Your observations of rivalries add spice to palace intrigues. Your long nights of solitude shape the melancholy undertones. The screen separating your world from your story grows thin, until it's hard to tell where reality ends and fiction begins. In these evenings, you discover your power. The palace may confine your body behind layers of robes and blinds, but your words slip past every boundary. They echo in voices reading aloud, carried down corridors, seeping into the dreams of men and women alike. You've taken the art of diary and waka and expanded it into something boundless, a living world of imagination. So picture yourself there, seated cross-legged, sleeves pulled around you, brush in hand, while the Empress listens with rapt attention. Outside, the cicadas hum, the lanterns sputter, and inside, the Tale of Genji unfurls like a scroll across the night. The painted screens no longer hide you, they frame your stage. And everyone leans closer, waiting for the next turn of your story. But success never comes without shadows, and at court, shadows arrive in the form of rivals. The same brilliance that charms the Empress and enthralls her circle also stirs jealousy. Some ladies-in-waiting glance at you over the rims of their fans with narrowed eyes, whispering when your sleeves brush past. It's one thing to be witty at poetry exchanges, it's another to dominate the palace with sprawling, addictive tales that everyone seems to crave. Your detractors begin to sharpen their pens. They write satirical verses, poking fun at your seriousness or hinting that your stories lack decorum. A mainstream fact, the Heian court was notorious for literary rivalries. Writers used poetry and prose as weapons, delivering insults cloaked in flowery metaphor. It wasn't unusual for entire reputations to hinge on whether one's verses hit harder than the others. And you bear the sting, but you also smirk privately. Some criticisms come from men uneasy with a woman mastering Chinese texts and weaving tales more elaborate than theirs. Others come from women threatened by your closeness to Shi, the Empress who is, after all, the centerpiece of their ambitions too. You've carved out a niche in a world where everyone competes for attention, and competition rarely plays fair. One particularly biting critique might have accused you of being too bookish, smelling of ink rather than perfume. Here's a quirky tidbit. In Heian culture, even scent was part of identity. Being told you smelled more like an ink stick than aloe or plum blossom was a cutting insult. You probably laughed at it in private, muttering something like, "Well, at least ink doesn't fade by sunrise." Historians still argue whether your diary's sharper remarks about other ladies were genuine dislike or strategic counterattacks. Some say you wielded sarcasm as a shield, protecting yourself from mockery. Others argue you truly had little patience for frivolity, preferring the company of books over gossip. Either way, your words left traces sharper than perfume, they lingered on the page, impossible to wash away. Yet not all rivalries are venomous. Some are almost playful, a battle of wit disguised as courtly exchange. You match others line for line, poem for poem, savoring the dance of words. And sometimes, after a particularly sharp exchange, you chuckle behind your fan, enjoying the game even if the stakes are high. Still, the tension builds. With each new chapter of Genji you unveil, admirers swoon while rivals seethe. You're reshaping literature in real time, but you're also stirring envy in a world that thrives on hierarchy. Court life, you realize, is not so different from the tales you're writing, filled with ambition, jealousy, fleeting love, and whispered betrayals. And so you continue. You hold your brush steady, even as the whispers ripple around you. Every satirical verse hurled your way becomes fuel, every jealous sigh a reminder that you are pushing boundaries. The court may sneer, but they cannot stop listening. Your stories are too intoxicating, your vision too sharp. So picture yourself again in those perfumed chambers, rivals trading glances, admirers hanging on your every word, the Empress smiling faintly at your side. In the center of it all, you keep writing, keep spinning the tale, proving that ink-stained sleeves can rival even the sweetest perfume. Your stories refuse to stay small. What began as twilight entertainment for the Empress now stretches across decades of a fictional life, until you have written not a tale but a vast tapestry. The Tale of Genji grows into 54 chapters, each one unfolding like a layer of brocade. You give your readers romance, heartbreak, exile, longing, and even the quiet ache of growing old. You don't shy away from flaws. Either your shining Prince Genji may be dazzling, but he is also reckless, selfish, and haunted by regret. You pour yourself into the work with a patience both obsessive and playful. Each chapter requires balance, poetry woven into prose, symbolism folded into daily gestures. A robe's color might hint at a lover's mood, the placement of a branch in a garden might signal fate. To modern eyes it may look like excessive detail, but to your audience, these flourishes are alive with meaning. A mainstream fact, Heian readers were trained to recognize layers of illusion. Every poem you slipped in could echo centuries of earlier verse, creating a web of references only the most cultured could fully grasp. And yet, for all its sophistication, Genji also thrums with human intimacy. You capture jealousy, tenderness, and betrayal with an honesty that makes your listeners blush. They recognize themselves in the pages, sometimes too clearly. Historians still argue whether certain episodes were thinly veiled commentaries on real court figures. Was the exile of Genji a sly jab at rivals? Was Lady Rokuge, with her possessive spirit, inspired by someone in Shie's household? The speculation swirls even now, proof of how sharply your fiction blurred with life. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scrolls of Genji were often read aloud in groups, with listeners passing commentary as though watching a drama. Imagine clusters of courtiers lounging in robes, nodding and gasping as your narrative twists, maybe even pausing to compare a character's blunder with someone in the room. Gossip disguised as literature, your specialty. You don't rush. Each new section emerges as your time, your mood, and the Empress's courtly demands allow. The result is not just a single story but a living world. Generations unfold across its chapters. Characters grow, falter, and fade. By the time you reach the final Uji chapters, the tone itself has shifted from glittering romance to quiet meditation on loss and impermanence. It's as though your own life, with its grief and solitude, has seeped deeper into the narrative. Composing on this scale is no small feat. The logistics alone are daunting: ink, brushes, paper, and attendance to copy sections so others can read them. Yet you persevere, each page another act of defiance against the expectation that women's writing should remain ornamental. You transform personal sorrow into universal drama, household whispers into timeless art. And when you pause, looking at the pile of scrolls beside you, you sense the immensity of what you've done. You've taken the fleeting world of Heian court life, the perfumes, the robes, the gossip, and stretched it into a mirror of humanity itself. Your chapters may end, your brush may still, But the echoes of your tale will not fade so easily. So there you sit, sleeves trailing, lamp sputtering, eyes weary but bright. Another chapter complete, another life captured in ink. You smile faintly, perhaps at the absurdity of it all. In a world that hides women behind painted screens, you have written a universe so vast it will outlive every wall around you. Your scrolls slip beyond the chambers of Empress Shi, carried on the sleeves of attendants, copied by eager hands, whispered aloud in candlelit gatherings. The tale of Genji becomes more than entertainment, it becomes a sensation. Courtiers trade installments the way modern fans binge a series and then gossip about the latest twist. Imagine a nobleman leaning against a pillar, fanning himself lazily while an attendant reads the newest chapter aloud, the listeners sighing or chuckling at every scandal. Mainstream fact: Heian texts were often circulated through hand-copied manuscripts, each version slightly altered depending on who copied it. Your story, therefore, spreads in many variations, like ripples across a pond. No two audiences hear it exactly the same way, but all are captivated by the luminous prince and his tangled loves. The whispers of reception travel back to you. Some praise the depth of your characters, marveling at how real their emotions feel. Others clutch their sleeves tighter, scandalized at how your pages reveal too much truth about courtly life. But scandal only feeds the appetite after all. Who can resist a story that feels like gossip wrapped in poetry? Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes readers were so eager that they begged for chapters to be read aloud during poetry contests or festivals, even when such events were supposed to be strictly formal. Imagine the Empress's elegant courtiers sneaking glances at one another, hungry for the next piece of Genji's drama while officials tried to keep the event dignified. Historians still argue whether you fully intended for your work to spread so widely. Did you write for private amusement, only to have it escape your hands? Or did you knowingly cultivate an audience, shaping each chapter for maximum allure? The truth may rest somewhere in between. You write because you must, because ink is your survival, but you're not blind to how eagerly people consume your words. The reception also carries a subtle power. By entertaining the court, you strengthen Empress Shi's cultural prestige. Her household becomes synonymous with brilliance, a hub of refinement that overshadows rivals. You, ink-stained sleeves and all, become her secret weapon. Every new scroll reinforces her aura as a patroness of genius. And yet, you remain half invisible. Your name is never spoken openly. Murasaki Shikibu itself is a nickname, drawn from your association with the Empress's office and perhaps from a character in your tale. You're both everywhere and nowhere, your identity hidden behind the words. It's a strange duality. Your story is on everyone's lips, yet your own lips are sealed. Still, the sound of your words drifting across chambers must have carried a private thrill. Imagine you, seated quietly in your quarters, hearing faint echoes of your story carried through the corridors. Somewhere, a courtier laughs at Genji's missteps. Somewhere else, a woman blushes at his charm. And you, behind painted screens, smile to yourself, knowing your imagination has become part of the court's bloodstream. So the scrolls spread, the whispers grow, and your story weaves itself into the fabric of Heian life. In a world obsessed with appearances, you've slipped behind the curtains and shown what lies beneath. And your audience, captivated, cannot look away. The palace grows quiet after the evening ceremonies, and that's when you find your truest rhythm. By lamplight, you sit with sleeves folded neatly, brush poised above the paper, the faint hiss of ink grinding in the stone echoing in your ears. Outside, crickets sing in the gardens, and the faint wind rustles bamboo. It is here, in this solitude, that you shape your story most deeply. You're surrounded by luxury, yet it often feels like a cage. The laughter of others drifts faintly down the corridors, but you prefer the company of your own words. Sometimes, you pause mid-sentence, brush lifted, listening to the silence as though it might speak back. You realize the irony. You are crafting a tale filled with glittering company, but you yourself spend your nights in near isolation. A mainstream fact, Heian court ladies often lived behind blinds or screens, hidden from direct view, their presence mediated by letters, poems, and gossip. This separation made daily life both restrained and strangely imaginative. For you, that seclusion feeds your work. You don't merely observe, you invent entire worlds to fill the spaces between what you're allowed to see. Still, the loneliness bites. You sometimes write of impermanence, of fleeting beauty, of love that cannot last. These themes aren't abstract, they're reflections of your own heart. You've known widowhood, you've known longing, and every brushstroke carries the weight of those memories. Historians still argue whether certain passages in Genji, especially the late, Samba Uji chapters, mirror your own grief or whether they are purely artistic exercises. Perhaps both are true. Here's a quirky tidbit. Lamps of your era often smoked badly, leaving soot on robes and papers. You probably finished many nights with smudges on your sleeves, the ink stains insult from rivals doubled by your smoky glow. If you sneezed mid-sentence, well, that was probably less poetic than you like to imagine. And yet, you keep going. The night gives you a strange kind of freedom. By day, the court defines you, lady-in-waiting, widow, mother, servant of the empress. But by night, you are simply the one who writes. The brush obeys no hierarchy, no rank, no rigid blind. Your solitude is not emptiness, it is space, a wide and silent stage on which your imagination performs without interruption. Sometimes you wonder if anyone will ever understand how much of yourself you've poured into these scrolls. But then, perhaps that is the point. Your life is finite. Your words, carried forward by copies and whispers, may last far longer. You are lonely, yes, but in that loneliness you have carved out something eternal. So once more you lean close to the lamplight, your brush whispering across paper, your thoughts flowing with the steady rhythm of ink and breath. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, your world grows vaster than the palace itself. And then, as suddenly as it began, your diary falls silent. One day you are recording the quips of courtiers, the subtle maneuverings of rival ladies, the moods of the empress, and then nothing. The ink stops. The scrolls end midstream, as though your brush was lifted and never returned. This abrupt silence has left generations baffled. Historians still argue whether you chose deliberately to stop, whether the pages were lost, or whether your life itself shifted so drastically that writing no longer felt possible. Some suggest illness overcame you. Others imagine you withdrawing into religious devotion, the way many women of the court eventually did. There are even whispers that you retired to a quiet countryside temple, your ink-stained sleeves exchanged for plain robes of prayer. A mainstream fact, many Heian women, especially those who outlived their husbands or patrons, often took vows later in life, living semi-cloistered existences while still maintaining some ties to family or the court. It was both socially acceptable and spiritually reassuring, a way to prepare for the impermanence you had already written so often about. But what really happened to you? No one knows for certain. The record of your final years is thinner than smoke. Some scholars believe you lived on quietly, watching your daughter grow and perhaps hearing faint echoes of Genji spreading further and further. Others wonder if you passed away not long after the diary ended, leaving behind only your words as testament. Here's a quirky tidbit. A few medieval sources actually confused your name with characters from your own book, blurring the line between creator and creation. Imagine future readers scratching their heads, trying to decide if Murasaki was a real woman or simply a figure plucked from the Shining Prince's life. Your identity itself became as elusive as your final years. The silence carries a strange power. Because you did not explain, later generations have filled the gaps with speculation, longing, and myth. Some see your retreat as deliberate, a final act of modesty. Others imagine you looking out over a garden pond, weary of courtly noise, deciding that the story was enough, that you yourself no longer needed to speak. Whatever the truth, your quiet exit only heightens the mystery. You leave behind scrolls that sparkle with life, but your own life fades into shadows. The woman who revealed so much about the human heart hides her own final chapter behind an impenetrable screen. And maybe that's fitting. You spent your days behind painted blinds, half seen, your voice carried indirectly. Why should your final years be any less veiled? The silence becomes part of the story, an unfinished note that keeps the world leaning closer, listening, even now. Your silence only deepens the resonance of what you left behind. The tale of Genji continues to ripple outward, shaping literature not just in your century but across every one that follows. Courtiers preserve it, monks copy it, scholars annotate it, and generations of readers return again and again to its shimmering pages. Your story becomes not only entertainment but education, a mirror of refinement and a model of sensitivity. A mainstream fact, by the medieval period, Genji was considered essential reading for anyone of cultural standing in Japan. Entire commentaries were written to explain its layers, and paintings illuminated its scenes, turning your words into visual art. The tale was not just read, it was performed, illustrated, celebrated in festivals, and echoed in other works. Still, the work carried an aura of mystery. Historians still argue whether you wrote the entire text alone or whether later scribes added to it. Some suggest the final Uji chapters might not be fully yours. Others insist the unity of tone proves your authorship. The debate continues, a scholarly tug-of-war that only adds to your legend. Here's a quirky tidbit. By the 17th century, readers played a card game called Genji Monogatari Karuta, matching symbols to chapters of your tale. Imagine your sprawling epic turned into a party game, courtiers laughing as they try to remember which symbol belongs to which episode of Genji's adventures. It's as if someone turned your saga into the medieval equivalent of Pokémon cards. But the legacy isn't all play. Your work also shapes language itself. The psychological depth you gave your characters, the way you describe fleeting thoughts and layered emotions, changes the way literature approaches the human mind. Modern critics call this interiority, the ability to look inside a character's consciousness. You did it centuries before it became a literary buzzword. And your influence expands beyond Japan. When your work is eventually translated, it astonishes foreign readers who cannot believe such subtlety, such elegance, such complexity existed 1,000 years ago. To them, you suddenly appear as a voice echoing across centuries, as fresh as if you'd written yesterday. Your tale endures because it holds everything: longing, beauty, failure, impermanence. It is not just a Heian romance, it is the texture of being human, woven in silk and ink. And so your name, half hidden in life, becomes immortal in death. You are the woman who wrote the world's first great novel, the quiet courtier who gave voice to eternity. So the legacy deepens, chapter after chapter, century after century, until your story is no longer only yours. It belongs to everyone who has ever loved, lost, or dreamed by lamplight. 1,000 years slip by, and yet your voice is still here. The painted screens are gone, the palace shadows faded, but the story you left continues to breathe. Modern readers pick up translations of the tale of Genji and marvel that someone living in the 11th century could so precisely capture the ache of love, the pang of jealousy, the melancholy of impermanence. Your world may have been silks and incense, but your emotions are timeless. A mainstream fact, Genji is now regarded globally as the world's first great novel, studied alongside Homer, Shakespeare, and Cervantes. Entire university courses unfold around your chapters, each one peeling back another layer of symbolism. Museums devote exhibits to your legacy, and scholars continue to trace the countless adaptations, from scroll paintings to manga, from no plays to modern stage dramas. Historians still argue about your identity itself. Were you truly Murasaki Shikibu, or is that simply a convenient label applied later? Did you intend to become a cultural giant, or were you merely passing long nights behind palace blinds? The debate rages on, but perhaps you would smile at the absurdity. People still fighting over the brushstrokes you left a millennium ago. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 21st century, you've even been celebrated with emojis and Twitter hashtags during anniversaries of Genji. Imagine your elegant prose floating in cyberspace, chopped into 280 characters and decorated with purple heart emojis. The Heian court would be horrified or maybe secretly amused. Your presence now stretches across continents. Tourists visit Uji to walk the landscapes described in your chapters. Scholars hold international symposia on your work. Artists reinvent your characters in films, anime, and even fashion shows. And through it all, you remain what you always were, a voice echoing from the shadows, at once intimate and universal. You, the woman once hidden behind blinds, now stand at the forefront of global literature. You remind the modern world that even in silence, even in seclusion, imagination can carve a path that lasts beyond lifetimes. Your lamp burned 1,000 nights ago, but the glow has not gone out. And now, with your story traced from quiet beginnings to eternal echoes, the time has come to let the tale fade gently. You close your eyes, and the world of Heian Japan drifts like incense smoke into the air, soft, fragrant, dissolving into memory. The rustle of silk robes quiets, the clatter of brushes subsides, and even the shimmering presence of Genji himself melts into twilight. Your breathing slows, steady as the flow of ink across paper. Each breath is another line drawn, another thought set free, until the pages of your mind grow blank and calm. You no longer need to hold the entire tale, because the story has already been told, and it will keep retelling itself in the hearts of those who dream. Let your thoughts soften, like lantern light dimming at dawn. Let the noise of rivalries and court whispers fall away, leaving only the still pond in the garden, the moon reflected in its surface. You are safe here, wrapped in quiet, your imagination tucked close, your spirit at rest. In this calm, you don't need to write anymore. You don't need to prove or defend or explain. The story continues without you, like a river flowing long after its source has slipped into silence. So drift now, gently, into your own dreamscape. Let the painted blinds close, let the lamp gutter out, and let the hush of history soothe you. Your journey is complete, and you can surrender to rest. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.